Welcome everyone to week 6 of MKTG3023, Statistical Marketing. This is going to cover the last examinable material for this semester. So let's get it underway and have a look at what we'll be covering this week. So we're looking at scanning the environment. So we talked about environmental scanning early on in the semester. I'm going to come back to it here and look at the issues which concern looking at how you might want to scan the environment and understand about all the different factors which can impact upon your marketing strategy and your brand through the environmental factors themselves. Go through the chapter outline here. Each of these should provide a guide to you to ensure that you're working your way through the chapter, that you're covering all the necessary points, but also provides a good way of rehashing the material come your study time before the mid-semester examination. So looking at some of the impact factors on the environment itself, the textbook really gets into it straight away with looking at the GFC, which was of course massive in 2008 for the period of a couple of years thereafter. Some of the things we saw and noticed in Australia, for example, of the impact of the GFC in Australia, to give you a sort of a context of how important environmental scanning can be upon your brand. Increase in sales of DIY products, mostly under $100. In other words, people were doing very small improvements on their house to try and get their house improved, and to try and at the same time do things around the house without risking too much money. We saw an increase in sales such as eggs and butter, value cuts of meat and non-branded products. In other words, people were cooking at home a lot more as well. So everyone's scared of spending money. They're trying to save the money, so they're trying to do things at home a lot more. So this is what some of the trends being picked up. Value packs are popular for Estee Lauder at Myer, and at the Estee Lauder counter at Myer. So in other words, the value deals, the freebie package and the freebie items, all very popular. The non-profit sector and charities experienced a lack of funding. So in other words, people were again trying to save money as much as possible anywhere they could, just in case everything went quite bad. Designer clothes had to be marked down because no one wanted to buy them anymore. So designer brands were forced into a fire sale situation just to try and move product and keep some cash flow happening to get them through the crisis. Couples planning weddings spent less than previous averages. I know at that time a couple of my friends who are getting married spent far less on their wedding than what they would have liked to because of their concern over the GFC. And it really brings home this point about the importance of doing environmental scanning. So some of the things we need to understand as marketers, it talks about Darwinian, in other words, the survival of the fittest, which is Darwin's big theory of evolution. Only the fittest will survive. It's also the case in business world and marketing that usually only the strongest and fittest brands will survive. So this is because the environment's ever changing. Not everyone's got the ability and flexibility within their business operation and brand to survive different economic periods. We look at an ability to adapt to a changing environment, and this is so important even in marketing. People like Richard Branson have made their companies more entrepreneurial and flatter management structures and all these sort of ideas as a way of being able to respond very quickly to changing environments. If you don't adapt, you don't survive. This is one key part of marketing, which you should have really got through from year one of your marketing degrees, is that if you don't adapt to what the customer needs are, you will not survive. You can't challenge the customer need. You need to adapt to it, or you just won't survive. So the reason why we do environmental scanning is because it can help us capitalize on early opportunities we see in the marketplace. It gives us an early warning too of any impending problems coming our way, like with the GFC. We can get an idea it's going to impact upon us sooner and not later. We can develop a customer-oriented culture within an organisation, so we work stronger on the relationship to have a stronger relationship trust within place. So that way the consumer sees more value than just price in the relationship, and therefore less likely to change away in any sort of period of downturn. We have a base objective of qualitative information about the environment. So in other words, don't just read the numbers, also go on feeling, go on your own decision-making ability, your own analysis, to see what could be happening out there in the environment. Look at intellectual stimulation as well to strategists. So in other words, with the constantly changing environment, you should be kept on your toes all the time. If you fall asleep a bit, the thing you have to ask yourself, is that because you're in a monopoly? Or if you're not, well, then you need to maybe wake up, because chances are things have been changing without you even realizing it. We also need to understand how the image of the organisation can be improved with the key stakeholders, and it's a means of continuing broad-based education for executives. So in other words, if we're doing environmental scanning, it means we keep the knowledge of industries and markets and competitors quite fresh in the minds of all the key people making the decisions in those areas. Now, what makes up the environment? Well, this nice little chart here is quite a good one to look at. It really does cover some of the key points we'll discuss for the rest of today. You've got the environment here being technological, social, regulatory or law, legal, economic and political. So call it a PEST if you will, bit of a modified PEST analysis. And you can see here the scaling level you need to undertake is at all different levels. So the corporate or strategic level, the SBU level, so the strategic business unit or single business unit, some people call it as well. So down to the product or market, even at a very, very defined or narrow context level. So again, looking at this, it's a good check to making sure that you're keeping an eye on all these factors in the environment across all different levels of the organisation to make sure nothing creeps up on you, but also you can take advantage of situations which are changing within the environment. And there are 4 phases discussed of the evolution of environmental scanning. We're now really scanning without an impetus, and then all the way down to scanning to enhance understanding of a specific event, scanning to make an appropriate response to markets and competition, and the final part of the evolution is strategic scanning to be on the lookout for competitive advantage. Really, what you need to be doing is the last one and not the first one. There are some people who just look around, see what's going on in the world, they look at Facebook or Twitter, wherever it happens to be, and then it leads down to that very last point there of trying to find a competitive advantage. The people who do that all the time are usually the ones who get the competitive advantage because they're looking out for it. They're doing the more high-level scanning across the different levels as discussed in the previous slide. So technology, it surrounds us, it's all around us, and it's part of our lives every day of the week. I'm sure there's some of you out there who have multiple devices. You want to have a smartphone or two, a tablet or two, a laptop or two. Nowadays we have lots and lots of technology all around us. So it's interesting to see how this impacts upon us in the environment. In terms of how it might do that, look for the invention, the creation of a new product or process is pretty critical nowadays as well. The innovation is the introduction of that product or process into the marketplace, talked about of course by Rogers in his famous 1983 paper, the adoption of innovations and social change. And diffusion is the spread of that product or process beyond its first use. So in other words, how quickly can we penetrate a market or an industry or a segment with the innovation? So they're things to look at. So good question for you. Stop yourself here. Ask yourself this question. Hit pause if you want to. Treat this as a very good exam question as well for your study. So discuss a product which did not diffuse through the market due to lack of market acceptance. It's a great question. It really gets you thinking about your own knowledge of products and case studies in a strategic sense. So again, it is an ideal question for study to go over. All right, so hopefully everyone's awake. Now you've finished hitting pause. We're back into the lecture and back into looking at technology management matrix. We can look at here different ways of looking at a matrix approach into understanding how technology position can influence our product position, whether we're behind or ahead of competitors, and if we're using the same older or newer technology. And you can see even with older and newer technology, it's broken up into different technology and how we can use it. So in other words, how you might want to manage technology, but also how you can use it to achieve a strategic advantage over competitors or catch up to them for that matter. So in the technological environment, the 5 categories of technology discussed in the book are energy, materials, transportation, communication and information, and genetic. Now, looking at political environment, some of the things to look at here: increase of geopolitical federations. In other words, we've seen a lot more free trade agreements being done. It's creating a lot more alliance between countries, particularly at regional levels. Rising nationalism versus world federalism. We've seen that across the world of late as well. We've seen limited wars, so wars confined to geographic regions. They don't spread beyond those areas. So we've seen that more recently in places like the Middle East and it says South Asia. So maybe there's been some conflict of late in those areas to look out for and be careful of. An increase in political terrorism. That's been very dominant the last few months, of course. We've seen these lone wolf attacks, as they're called. Revolutions are talked about. So the Arab Spring, of course, is discussed a lot by people in context of politics in the last few years. The rise of the third party in the United States, in other words, outside the 2 major party system. So we've seen any third party gains in the US. Some people say the rise of socialism. And the decline of major powers and the rise of emerging nations. You know, I've heard the term BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So we call this BRICS. They're seen as the emerging nations in the world, and some will say be the world's leading economies in the next 2 decades or thereabouts. Minority grouping, having, of course, Australia had its first female Prime Minister. And I'm sure we'll see many more to come. Hopefully we will. And it's great to see these sort of changes happening. The rise in grey power or senior citizen power in developed nations like Australia, for example, around issues we've seen recently on superannuation and pensions are becoming, and health, of course, becoming more topical issues, particularly as they grow in size. And some of the other things talked about here, I won't go into all of them. There are a lot of things in here to look at and consider. The main takeaway from the political environment, again, is contextual upon your brand and what you're examining. So keep that in mind, that some of these factors to look at, you know, in politics need to be contextual. Okay, now, economics. We're all fans of economics, right? Come on, I know you are. All right, so keep an eye out on any changes in the world economy. So things like the GFC, for example. Australia's not recession proof. We haven't seen a recession in Australia for a long time now, but some say there's one on the way shortly. Who knows? We've seen increasing foreign ownership of the US economy, so more people investing into the United States, mainly for safety reasons linked into the above point. Increasing regulation and management of national economies. We're seeing that as a new form of protectionism on trade. We're seeing the rise of developing nations becoming superpowers. World food production has become quite advanced in some contexts, but yet in other parts of the world, people still try and eke out a living any way they can. It's a struggle just to even survive on a daily basis. Some of the other things to look at is the world trend for growth. They say here the collapse of the world monetary system. Didn't know there was one. Anyway, high inflation, significant employee union ownership of US businesses. Again, your takeaway from these points are to keep it contextual on your own strategy. Not all of them are going to be relevant to what you're looking at, but they need to be considered whether they impact upon your brand or not. Some of them can be dismissed quite quickly and others won't be. So it's up to you to put this in the context of your own brand. Okay, so look at the social environment now. Some of the social trends we've seen emerge over time, which have been significant. An orientation towards time, so work-life balance is a good example of this. The quality we have in our life, we talk about living standards. Some people say they're falling in some ways, but rising in others. So, for example, you know, how many jobs do you have to have nowadays to have a mortgage in Sydney? Health, there's a more concern over our health and things like obesity as issues we now discuss in society. The environment itself, whether we really do care about the environment. Climate change is becoming a significant issue. People may discount it all they want, but it will be here for some time to come, of course. Our home environment, how we're now spending a lot more time at home, in home, with the advent of tablet technology, but also in-home media streaming services like Netflix and Apple TV, some examples. Personal finance, we're now a lot more aware of our money and how we should spend it and how we should account for it. But also some people are changing their way of looking at personal finance. Some people are staying away from the idea of a large mortgage and instead rather to live in the moment and just rent a property. And diversity of lifestyles, there's definitely that happening. We're all different people, that's for sure, but you see it now more than ever. Okay, so some of the other things to look at. The book goes into a bit more detail on the orientation towards time, about time saving, think about services marketing here and how a lot of services and products have been built around time saving and trying to make time for us. Also think about the time we've now lost to social media. If you're on social media, that was time you once spent on other activities before and now you spend it on looking at the feed, so not fantastic. Quality, health, really the textbook goes through all these points here in a lot of detail. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these things, but a lot of these should really reach out and speak to you on things like here on the environment with packaging and labelling. Plastic bags, so for example here in the ACT, the national capital, we don't have plastic bags given out freely with your grocery purchase. You need to buy them or bring them as a way of trying to minimise the harm to the environment. So look into these concepts again, like any environmental factor, keep them to the context of your brand strategy or any case study you look at and examine, keep it to that in itself. Okay, so let's fly through these ones here. Personal finance is also discussed in a bit more detail. Again, have a look at this, have a look at how it's changing, and keep up to date with trends is the main takeaway from these things. Diversity of lifestyles. Again, these are some very important points being made here. We're really getting into sociology now, but keep it contextual to marketing, how it may affect opportunities which may exist in the market or how it may impact upon your strategy for your brand overall. Okay, so moving through the last of these points and on to social trends. Here's a nice question for you with the previous couple of slides anyway. Discuss each of the social trends that indicate a product which meets each trend. Again, a good exam question. I might, for example, give you 3 of those trends before and ask you to discuss a product which could meet that trend and try and capitalize on that trend. So it's a good one to think about. It gets you thinking. Whilst it might be an easy question, it's one to get your mind thinking about what's coming at you for the rest of the examination. So again, it provides another good opportunity here to hit pause, go away, do this as an exam style question, write it up for 20 minutes, come back. You can always unpause me and then go through the rest of today's lecture material. Okay, so ethics and the environment. We've looked at ethics a lot, and we should, because ethics is becoming more important as an issue in marketing. Great example in ethics and the environment with the BP and the Deepwater Horizon explosion in the United States, which killed 11 people, but also had the long-term effect of devastating a huge area of the US marine environment around the oil rig when it occurred, and the long-term effects upon those people, which raises the question, what should be the overall responsibility of a corporation when it has significant externalities associated with its operations? In other words, where do we draw the line with an organisation? Where does it cease to be responsible, and how should it be responsible as well for its actions, in what context? Good question to look at. Okay, so some of the things to be aware of. Looking at environmental scanning, linking into marketing strategy. Keep a tab on broad trends appearing in the environment. Again, some of the subtle changes you may have already picked up on, changing environmental factors out there, things like how now winter clothing is on sale for a lot shorter space of time than it once was. We're also seeing a lot less need for winter clothing because the winters themselves aren't so cold as they once were. So we're looking at all these sort of factors impacting upon brands all across different industry sectors. If you get the chance to watch a good documentary series, it was on SBS recently called The Year of Living Dangerously. It was all about how environmental factors are impacting upon us as consumers. It is well worth the watch. Okay, getting back to the lecture slide here and the points being made. Look at the determine the relevance of an environmental trend. Study the impact of an environmental trend on a product or market. It's important to forecast the direction of any environmental trends into the future. So, for example, energy consumption, how energy might be changing, consumption use as well. For example, in Western Australia, because of the falling energy usage from domestic consumption with the use of low energy devices, power companies over there are looking at having excess supply because a lot of consumers have also taken up solar panels. So a lot of electricity companies in Western Australia, a lot of excess supply, which is basically being generated to go nowhere. We can also analyse the momentum of a product and market business, and we need to study any opportunity that an environmental trend can provide. All right, so also don't forget to relate the outcome of any environmental trend to corporate strategy. This is a good slide overviewing of perhaps some of the key points talked about before. The systematic approach to environmental scanning, so we can pick up events in different environments. Go through a whole checklist here. And again, is well worth the read because this is something you should be doing if you work in practice and you undertake strategy for a brand. You need to be aware of these environmental scanning factors because nowadays with fast-moving and liquid markets, as they're called, you need to be very much aware of the environment so things don't creep up on you and wash away any sort of strategy you may have in place. Okay, organisational arrangements and problems. Corporations organise scanning activities in 3 different ways. We have the line level, which is very much a basic customer contact level. We have at the strategic level, where the strategic planner is looking at environmental scanning at a strategy level. And of course, we can also have it at a more functional level, perhaps at a marketing level, for example, across all the firm, or an accounting level across the firm. So we can have different ways of looking at the environment. So whoever is assigned to scan the environment should undertake the following tasks, looking at trend monitors. So there are people now engaged to monitor trends on social media, to try and identify them before they become noticeable in the world and in the environment. So people use social media for that reason. Forecast preparation to try and get accurate forecasting to happen. It's good to look at the environmental checklist to develop scenarios. Scenario planning is now very big in marketing. It's important to have scenarios planned just in case something does go wrong, or right for that matter. Internal consulting, so doing a long-term approach here to environmental matters and conducting special future research studies as needed to support decision making and planning. It's also an important reason why we need to scan the environment and why the checklist helps make sure we're doing it the right way. Looking at being an information centre, the rise of big data, knowledge is power, that's for sure. So looking at how we can then use all this knowledge and data as a way of getting intelligence about markets, competitors and industries. Communication is changing themselves, the way we've all moved digital, and even then with multiple social media accounts and platforms nowadays, it's more important than ever to keep an eye on any emerging social media trends or applications, or apps as you guys call them, or even I do. And also it's important to keep an eye on any sort of improvements in processes. So there could be something which happens, so we can have tools and techniques developed to help us out with those. It's been a long day. All right, so that's it for this week. That's it for, in fact, this part of the semester. So what you need to do now is go away and study weeks 1 to 6 in the textbook and any notes I've made as well. Anything I've said and done. The recording should be available apart from week 2 where ECO360 died that week, but I recommend that you follow the notes for that week, read them, understand them, form study groups if you need to. But as of this recording date right now, it's less than 2 weeks to go until your mid-semester exam. So my advice to you is to study well, think about strategy and how marking applies in a strategic context, and get a good knowledge up of cases. You'll need cases in the exam room when your heart's going 180 beats per minute. You'll need to think of cases quickly and which apply to your relevant question you're examining. Just a final point to make as well, as this is the last lecture for this half of the semester, I won't be seeing you after the mid-semester exam. Song Ting Dong will be taking the course after week 7. So week 7 material will not be on the exam, just to make that very clear to you all as well. So it's week 1 to 6. Week 7 is the mid-semester exam. Date, time and venue details will all be on the Waddle site as soon as they're finalised. That said, thank you so much for all your contributions during this half of the semester. Thank you if you've watched these YouTube videos all the way through and haven't sped me up. And hopefully you found these good to watch, interesting to watch. Let me know if I can make them more fun and exciting. And if I can't, well, hey, it's just me. So for now, this is Dr. Andrew Hughes saying goodbye to you all. And it's goodbye from here on the 201st floor of the ANU recording studio here in Acton, Canberra, heart of the nation's capital. See you next time. Good luck in the exam. Goodbye for now.